My girlfriend, Jessica, had this peculiar way of showing her affection, or at least that's what she called it. It often felt more like a test, a constant examination of my devotion. There were times, especially on those nights when the rain lashed against the windows, that she would feign illness. Her performance was convincing enough to send me out into the downpour, searching for some obscure remedy she claimed would soothe her imaginary ailment. Then there were the hickeys, deliberately placed on her neck, little purple badges of someone else's affection, flaunted just enough to prick at my jealousy. And perhaps the most public display of her tests involved her friends. For the sake of appearances, for some social validation I never quite understood, she would make me wait. I remember one particular afternoon. The rain was relentless, and she kept me standing outside her apartment building for a full 3 hours. Eventually, I reached a point where I couldn't endure it anymore. The constant need to prove myself, the manufactured drama. It had eroded something within me. I decided, quietly and firmly, that I needed to end our relationship. But when I tried to broach the subject, Jessica simply laughed it off, assuming I was just in one of my moods, a temporary sulk that would pass. Then came my birthday. My phone rang, and it was Jessica. "All right," she said, her voice light and teasing. "Don't be mad anymore. Come to Starlight Club tonight. I've got a surprise for you." I told her I was busy, that I had other plans. She didn't believe me, of course. A playful laugh echoed through the phone. "What could possibly be so important?" she asked. "I'm getting married today," I replied, the words hanging in the air between us. Later that day, I found myself standing outside Jessica's apartment building. It was raining again, a familiar backdrop to our tumultuous relationship. In my hands, I held a birthday cake. A silly gesture, perhaps, considering everything. My messages to her remained unanswered, each unanswered text a small affirmation of my decision. As I was about to give up, to turn and walk away, I heard a burst of cheers from the upper floors. Looking up, I saw Jessica and her friends leaning over the balcony railing. "Whistling brother-in-law!" Jessica called down, her voice echoing in the wet air. "You'd really wait for her in the rain for 3 hours. Didn't think it was true." Her friends joined in, their laughter and teasing swirling around her. "Your love is so enviable. Jessica is so lucky." I stood there, watching them. The vibrant colors of the world around me seemed to drain away, leaving everything in shades of gray and black. Except for Jessica. She stood out in stark contrast, a bright splash of color with a wide smile on her face. She looked at me, her expression like a puppy that had just earned a treat, basking in the praise of her companions. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced my chest, a cold, tearing sensation, as if a bitter wind had found its way inside. Jessica waved at me. "David, come over here." I looked at her for a few long seconds, taking in the scene, the laughter, her oblivious joy. Then I turned and walked away, the rain washing over me. I had been with Jessica for 5 years. I had seen her go from a student with empty pockets to the owner of a small, thriving business. I was there for all of it, the constant witness to her ambition and drive. I remember the day she closed her first significant deal. She had held me so tightly, tears streaming down her face. "David," she had sobbed, "I promise I'll be good to you. I'll always love you." Back then, I had believed her with all my heart. I don't know exactly when things started to change, but somewhere along the way, the good memories became fewer and farther between. There was the time, in the dead of winter, a night so cold the snow crunched underfoot, when she faked being sick. It was another test, she said, to see how much I loved her. Without a second thought, I bundled up and went out to buy the medicine she requested. The roads were treacherous, covered in ice, and I slipped and fell 4 times on the way back. When I finally returned, shivering and sore, Jessica hugged me at the door. "Baby, you're so good," she had said, her voice full of false admiration. Then she confessed she hadn't been sick at all. It was just another one of her little tests. I don't know what I truly felt in that moment, but the throbbing pain in my legs made my eyes water. Another time, Jessica had deliberately left a hickey on her neck, a blatant sign of someone else's attention. That incident led to the biggest fight we had ever had. But then, a few days later, she posted about it on social media, something along the lines of, "My baby truly loves me, or he wouldn't be so jealous." Over the years, there were so many of these crazy things, these manufactured dramas, that I had lost count. Passing a trash can on the street, I tossed the birthday cake inside. All those years of Jessica's tests, her manipulations, had finally worn away whatever love I had left for her. As I walked through the rain, I remembered another rainy night, years ago, when we were in our sophomore year of college. I was coming back from a tutoring session, and the rain started to pour down. Getting off the bus, I saw her standing under the dim glow of a streetlight. She ran over to me, a bright smile on her face, and handed me a hot sweet potato, still warm in her hands. "Eat it," she had said, her affection so blatant and passionate that I felt it for the first time, a genuine spark. But 5 years later, the person was still the same. Yet everything had changed. I had been feeling disappointed for a while, clinging to the memory of the happiness she had once brought me, holding on to a fragile hope that she might revert to that girl under the streetlight. But it turned out to be just wishful thinking. The moment she started using my love as a trophy, as bragging rights for her social media, our love had already transformed into something unrecognizable. Today was supposed to be her birthday. I had planned to talk to her, to discuss our future, to see if there was still a path forward for us. But Jessica hadn't given me that chance. She had taken 3 hours of my time, 3 hours in the rain, to show me the reality of our relationship. There was no future for us. Come to think of it, 3 hours was a small price to pay for such a clear revelation. Before I completely disappeared from their sight, I overheard their chatter from the balcony. "Seems like he's mad, Jessica. Are you going to go coax him?" Jessica's casual voice, slightly raised, floated down. "No need. He likes it this way. I've gotten used to it after all these years. He'll come back soon enough." She sounded so confident, buoyed by her successful career. She probably figured I was too dull, too dependent, to leave her golden opportunity. But I wouldn't go back, Jessica. I didn't want you anymore. That night, Jessica didn't call once. The next morning, I watched her leave for work before returning to our shared apartment. I left her a letter on the kitchen counter. There was no need to pack bags. I simply grabbed my ID and passport. Before leaving, I couldn't resist one last glance around the place. This was the apartment we had rented after graduating. We had done it all together, choosing the furniture, hanging up lights when we barely had enough money. Eventually, we had even managed to buy it. It was a small place, but we had never changed much, every corner holding a memory. Now, those memories felt like a cruel joke. The day I left on the plane, I changed my SIM card, severing the last tangible connection to Jessica and that city. Years later, I found myself back in CDA. The taxi I was in was stopped at the gate of a sprawling estate. "Private property," the guard said. "No entry without permission." I rolled down the window. "It's me, David." The old guard squinted, his eyes widening in recognition. "Young master, you're finally back." The massive estate felt strangely empty. I knelt in the courtyard for what seemed like an hour, the hard stone pressing against my knees, but no one came to offer even a cushion. I truly understood then the weight of my past actions. Eventually, my father, his hair now streaked with gray, was wheeled out. He lay with his eyes closed in a rocking chair, his silence heavy and profound. After a long, drawn-out pause, he finally spoke. "I still remember your determination when you left for that poor girl. Your mother tried to talk you out of it, but you wouldn't listen. I tried everything, including disowning you." "Dad, I regret it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll do whatever you say from now on." The rocking chair stopped moving. Slowly, my father opened his eyes and looked at me. "In that case," he said, his gaze unwavering, "proceed with the wedding to Fiona." I was stunned. Fiona. The name felt both familiar and distant, pulling up memories I had almost completely buried. Fiona, my fiancée from years ago. Our families had been friends for ages, and we had gotten engaged when I was just 18. Back then, I had left the city for Jessica without a second thought. Before I left, I had gone to apologize to Fiona, asking her to dissolve our engagement. What had she said? I remembered her quiet acceptance. "Since we were kids, when have I not agreed to what you wanted?" So I had naturally assumed our engagement was long over. I looked up, a bit confused. "Is Fiona still not married? She must be 25 by now." "You weren't around. Who would she marry?" my mother said, shooting me a pointed look as she brought out a platter of fruit. "Get up already, you're in the way." I staggered to my feet, hearing her add, "Since you're back, the first thing you'll do is apologize to Fiona and sort things out with her." When I went to Fiona's house, she wasn't home. I heard she was abroad for work. Her family, however, was genuinely happy to see me. It wasn't the cold, accusatory scene I had imagined. There was no sarcasm, no resentment. "We heard you were abroad, taking a break," Fiona's mother said warmly. "Now that you're back, you're staying for good, right?" I blinked and nodded. Fiona's mother took my hand. "When Fiona insisted on breaking the engagement without a word, that was our fault. Her dad already talked to her. We understood your need to leave. Now, about you and Fiona." I was too ashamed to say much. "I'll leave it to both families to decide," I mumbled. After leaving Fiona's house, I called her. She answered almost immediately, her voice as calm and composed as I remembered. "Hey, Fiona, it's me." A wave of guilt washed over me. I didn't expect our engagement to still be on. I hesitated. "You probably don't want to be involved with someone like me. I'll see if there's a peaceful way." She interrupted me gently. "What's there to mind?" she said. "You didn't do anything drastic. It was just an imperfect relationship. That's not a stain." Then, she switched topics so quickly it made my head spin. "When's the wedding?" she asked. "Not set yet, but both parents are pressing." "All right, I'll come back soon," she said, and the call ended. I was a bit dazed. Kids from families like ours should have known that our marriages weren't entirely in our own hands. Knowing was one thing, accepting was another. I figured I should probably learn this from Fiona. Fiona returned home in about 2 weeks. On her first day back, she brought gifts for everyone. She seemed more mature, more composed than I remembered. She spoke to my father with warmth and charm, and kept my mother happy without even trying. It was no wonder they all adored her. I watched her from across the room, quickly taking a sip of tea when she happened to glance my way. Our wedding was set for early May, the 5th, which also happened to be my birthday. That morning I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello? No way, it's actually you." The voice was instantly recognizable. Henry, Jessica's friend. "David, finally found you. Where have you been? Jessica's been worried sick." I didn't know how he had gotten my new number, but I frowned slightly. "Don't contact me again. We broke up." There was some commotion on the line, and then another voice took over. "You left a letter, ending things one-sidedly. I didn't agree, so it doesn't count. It was Jessica. David, what are you mad about? Just because I left you waiting in the rain for 3 hours? Is that really worth running away from home? I listened silently, too tired to even argue. Once again, I felt a surge of certainty that leaving had been the right decision. Okay, I apologize. Jessica's voice softened, taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. Babe, don't be mad. I just had doubts about your love for me. That's why I tested you. Cheer up, okay? It's your birthday. I planned a surprise. Will you come? There were cheers in the background. David, Jessica's going to propose. So romantic, someone yelled. Get lost. You just spoiled the surprise. Jessica laughed, scolding her friends. The noise was giving me a headache. I instinctively rubbed my temples, and the makeup artist, who was working on me, jumped, alarmed. Sorry, David. Did I hurt you? No, keep going, I said. Okay, David, I'll make you the most handsome groom today. The phone line went silent. As I was about to hang up, Jessica suddenly laughed. David, are you playing a trick on me? Are you trying to make me jealous? Her tone was forced and casual, but I felt a wave of relief wash over me, the realization that I wouldn't be tangled up with her again. Not kidding, I said, a small chuckle escaping my lips. We got the papers last month. Wedding's today. You're not invited. My wife probably wouldn't be pleased. David! Jessica's voice rose sharply. Are you done joking? I cut the call, pulled out the SIM card, and tossed it in the trash. The makeup artist looked startled, freezing for a moment. I smiled at her through the mirror. Sorry about that. Please continue. Our wedding took place in a beautiful old church. It didn't feel like a typical impersonal event. It felt heartfelt. I couldn't help but ask my assistant, who designed all this? It looks nice. David, the assistant whispered. Fiona did it herself. I was stunned. I hadn't expected Fiona to care so much about what I had assumed was just a business arrangement. There were people guiding me through each step, and before I knew it, I was making my way down the aisle to the altar. Fiona was standing with her back to me, a vision in her wedding dress. At the priest's signal, she turned to face me. Cheers erupted from everyone in the church. I met Fiona's gaze from afar. Was I imagining things? Or did her smile seem genuinely happy? Maybe I should take a cue from her and master the art of appearances. I adjusted my expression and followed my mother towards Fiona, until I placed my hand into Fiona's warm palm. The ceremony went off without a hitch. After all the formalities were concluded, our parents whisked us away to meet a seemingly endless stream of uncles and aunts. By the time we finally made it to our new home, a cozy little villa in a nice, quiet area, my legs felt like they had run a marathon. It was almost 11 at night. I headed straight for the shower. By the time I finished and stepped out, it was already midnight. Fiona was sitting on the couch in her pajamas, her hair still a bit damp, a few strands falling over her forehead. It was a contrast to her usual meticulous appearance, and it made her seem more approachable. I noticed she was still looking at her tablet. Still working this late? I blurted out. Fiona lifted her gaze from the tablet. Not working. Waiting for you. Honestly, I wasn't very familiar with Fiona. We had rarely chatted over the years. As I pondered why she was waiting up for me, she set her tablet aside and stood up. This late, she said softly. I nodded. It is. So, what now, David? She asked, her eyes meeting mine. Time for bed, I replied, the words feeling a little strange. As if on impulse, I reached out and gently touched her cheek. Let's go to the bedroom, I said. We were married now, legally bound. We hadn't signed any prenuptial agreements, and I certainly wasn't planning on a life of abstinence. Having a woman here, willing to indulge me, was hard to resist. I convinced myself in a matter of seconds that it was just mutual consent between two adults. We stumbled into the bedroom, our robes discarded somewhere along the way. I had thought Fiona would be cool and distant, but she surprised me by being unreserved, with no pretense, just raw honesty and desire. The chandelier above wasn't even on, but I kept seeing its light in my mind's eye. Just as I drifted off, I impulsively bit Fiona on the shoulder. She chuckled softly. "David, you still like to bite, huh?" I barely caught her words. I was too far gone. In the morning, Fiona got dressed and came over to tap my head through the covers. "I know you're awake. No rush, I'm off to work. Remember to eat later." She rattled off the list in a slightly husky voice. I finally pulled myself out of bed when I heard the door close behind her. Staring at the ceiling light, I realized that none of this was what I had expected. But after that night, my relationship with Fiona took a surprising turn. She would be home to have dinner with me, listening to my stories about the wealthy folks I encountered at work. Sometimes she would respond with a genuine laugh, and I started accompanying her to events, playing the dutiful husband. Fiona was also the ideal partner in bed, with no drama outside the bedroom, health-conscious, routinely getting checked up. She felt safe and reliable. I was increasingly pleased with this unexpected alliance. My parents noticed the change in me too. "David, you've been looking good since the wedding," Mom said with a smile. "It means Fiona takes good care of you." She sighed then. "But before, when you suddenly came back looking so drained, my heart ached." My smile faltered for a second. "Geez, I was feeling just fine," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Dad quickly shifted the topic. "Time to focus post-wedding. Let's have you intern at the company next month, get a feel for the business." He made the decision right there, outlining my next move. Later at home, Fiona was heading to the study. She was diligent, often working late there. "Already had dinner?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied politely. "You not yet?" I paused. "So late." I texted saying I wouldn't be back for dinner. Fiona nodded. "I saw it," I admitted. "Just didn't have much appetite without you around." Her words sent my brain into a thoughtful pause. I watched her for a moment as she headed to the study, then suddenly stopped. "Something else on your mind?" I looked away, absent-mindedly picking at my nails. "Not really, but Dad wants me to help at the company. I might buy a nearby apartment. This is too far for commuting." "Do it," Fiona replied simply. "Let me know when you pick a spot, and I'll have someone set it up. We'll need a duplicate of all our stuff there." "A we?" I lifted my head sharply. "You're moving in too?" She looked at me, her tone even. "We've only been married a month. You're eager for a split already?" Oddly enough, I sensed a hint of a pout in her tone. "Not what I meant," I stammered. "You're welcome to join." "Great, settled," Fiona smiled. "Night, hubby." I was left a bit dazed, even after she shut the study door behind her. "Fiona, did she take some kind of happy pill before starting at the company?" Fiona and I moved into a nearby apartment. I didn't get a big place, just enough for the two of us. She wasn't around all the time, so anything more felt excessive. Dad didn't reveal my true status at work, having me listed as his assistant, shadowing him daily, loading me up with tasks. He was seriously grooming me. The days blurred by, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. One early winter day, someone unexpected showed up at the company. Henry. I was passing by the general manager's office with a stack of files when he rushed out. "Hey, man." Henry looked puzzled seeing me. "What are you doing here?" I hadn't expected to bump into him. I offered a polite, if slightly strained, grin. "I work here, and I'm not your buddy." He looked a mite embarrassed. "My bad, just slipped." I knew he was an executive from another company, probably here for a deal. I didn't linger, just headed for the elevator to the top floor. Henry stood there for a moment, processing what he had just seen, then turned around and went back inside the general manager's office. "What position does that gentleman hold at your company?" he asked. "Chairman's assistant," the general manager replied, looking puzzled. "What's up?" "No, nothing," Henry said, thinking for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you know what his girlfriend does for a living?" The manager was stunned for a second and turned to look at his secretary. The secretary replied, "I don't think David's married, right? Never heard him mention a girlfriend." The first thing Henry did after leaving the company was call Jessica. "Jessica, guess who I ran into today?" 4 days after my encounter with Henry, in the evening, I was walking home from work when I saw Jessica. She was dressed in a fancy gown, leaning against a luxury car, drawing the gaze of passers-by. "David," she called out to me. "You're not doing so well without me, huh?" I ignored her and kept walking. She frowned and reached out to grab my wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. Whispering, she said, "We've been at this long enough. Shouldn't you stop being mad by now? Wouldn't it be easy to just come back to me and do nothing?" I couldn't hold back a sharp retort. "Are you out of your mind? I told you already, I'm married. Who would believe that?" Jessica looked nonchalant. "David, who would you marry if not me?" Just a few words with her, and I already felt exhausted. Before I could reply, a hand reached over and pulled mine away from Jessica's with an undeniable authority. I hadn't even noticed when Fiona had arrived, or what she had seen. By the time I realized, she was already standing beside me, looking at Jessica with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He married me," Fiona said, her voice calm and steady. "You got a problem with that?" Jessica's expression finally changed. She looked from me to Fiona, a flicker of understanding dawning in her eyes. She finally seemed to realize that she no longer held a special place in the heart of the boy who used to revolve around her. "Who are you?" she asked Fiona, her voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. "Introduce yourself." I instinctively held Fiona's hand back. "My wife, Fiona." Fiona turned to me, a hint of a smile in her eyes. Maybe the sight of Fiona and me together made Jessica uneasy, because she started getting agitated. "David, are you really married? Do you need to see the marriage certificate?" she yelled, her voice rising. "How could you do this to me? I worked so hard, built my career for you, endured endless social gatherings for the sake of marrying you. But you dumped me over a trivial issue and married someone else. David, do you even have a heart?" "Don't make it sound so justified." Fiona's voice turned cold. She glanced at the expensive car parked on the side of the road. "Did you buy that car for David? Those designer clothes, too? You're driven by vanity, but dare to stand on some moral high ground. Where's your pride?" And before Jessica could retort, Fiona continued, "The insignificant issues you're referring to might not be so trivial to David." I had never expected Fiona to stand up for me like this. I couldn't hold back a look of admiration. Feeling Jessica's gaze on us, I impulsively linked arms with Fiona. "Wife," I said, the word feeling surprisingly natural. "You said it perfectly." Fiona seemed a little stunned, a hint of redness appearing at the tips of her ears. Jessica was furious. She took a step forward and swung her hand at Fiona. Finally, Henry, who had been watching from the shadows, couldn't stand by any longer. He rushed out and pulled Jessica aside. Fiona didn't spare them another glance, pulling me away with her. On the way back to our apartment, neither of us spoke, not until we reached the entrance. Feeling a little awkward, I said, "Let go for a sec, so I can use my fingerprint to unlock the door." We had dinner as usual. Then she went to the study to work, and I went to work out. But tonight, her routine changed. Wearing a robe, she blocked me as I stepped out of the bathroom, the steam still clinging to my skin. Barely catching my breath, I instinctively explained, "Jessica and I aren't involved anymore. She just can't move on." Fiona's voice was soft. I know. Then why are you— I cut her off, my own voice a little breathless. Just wanted to kiss you. Liar. One kiss led to another, and we ended up in bed. When I finally regained my senses, a sudden realization hit me. Oh no, I've developed feelings for her. Otherwise, why would my first instinct be to explain myself, afraid she'd be upset? This business marriage wasn't as straightforward anymore. I didn't expect to run into Jessica again so soon. It was a business banquet, and Fiona had brought me along. She was chatting confidently with the company bosses, a task that didn't seem easy. I hadn't been standing for long before my back started to ache, a long-standing issue from all those years of running around for Jessica. Fiona leaned over to my ear and said, "Go sit down and rest for a bit." I nodded, slipping away unnoticed. But before I reached the designated resting area, I stopped. I saw Jessica. She was on a sofa, holding a glass of red wine, talking with some young people. Jessica was undeniably attractive, and her elegant speech was captivating. A bold young man asked her, "Do you have a boyfriend?" "No," she smiled, taking a sip of wine, her eyes then locking with mine from across the room. The guy continued, "Someone as beautiful as you shouldn't be single." Jessica forced a smile. "Just broke up." People around them exchanged glances and teased. "Seems like Jessica's had a heartbreak, huh?" In their small talk, Jessica mentioned her ex-boyfriend. "He treated me like I was his whole world," she said, her voice tinged with a wistful tone. "Brought me breakfast every morning, went out in the snow at midnight for my cold medicine, picked me up when I was drunk at a bar, even waited 3 hours in the rain for me." The group exchanged glances, replying in awe, asking how she could have lost such a good guy. Jessica smiled again, her eyes flicking towards me. "Yeah, how did I lose him?" One of the guys, who seemed like he came from a wealthy family, spoke logically and sharply. "You say he did all this, but it sounds like you didn't care much for him." Around them, people fell silent, leaving Jessica looking awkward. The young man chuckled. "Sorry, I speak bluntly. Don't take it to heart. But just listening to you talk, you always have this subtle smugness. Left me a bit surprised. If my girlfriend waited for me 3 hours in the rain, I'd be heartbroken for sure. So it's no wonder you lost that guy." He checked his watch, got up, and left. "This party is really lame. Anyone can just show up." That comment felt like a slap to Jessica's face. Her expression darkened. That's when I walked over and sat down near her. "David?" Someone recognized me. "Where's your wife?" I replied with a smile. "She's chatting with friends. What are you all talking about? Looks like the vibe is good." That person paused, probably wondering where I got the idea that the vibe was good. They also seemed awkward now, eager to switch the topic, so they turned the conversation to me. "David and Fiona have a great relationship." "Yeah, I met Fiona at a party a few days ago. Couldn't stop talking about her husband. Really enviable." "David wasn't around here a few years back. Heard you went to clear your head." I nodded. "Yeah, hit a wall, got hurt, came back. Ha 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 ha, you're so funny." We just chit-chatted. Jessica remained silent. After a while, Fiona came over. She seemed to completely ignore Jessica, walking straight to me. "Rested enough? Let's go home?" She extended her hand to me, and I naturally took it. Even as we were leaving, we were still the center of that group's attention. Someone who seemed to be in the know quietly remarked, "Heard that those years David wasn't in the city, he didn't go abroad. And he had a girlfriend, fell out with his parents. A guy who left so determinedly is now back again. Must have been really heartbroken." A girl who had just returned from studying abroad pointed at us, looking puzzled. "Who are they, anyway?" The earlier speaker filled her in. "David is the only son of the group. Fiona is currently the head of Future Tech. They just got married last year. Though it's a business marriage, they seem to get along really well." Jessica looked stunned. "You said David is... who?" Fiona pulled me towards the garage. The driver already had the car ready. When I got in, a young guy's face turned from the passenger seat. "Hey, brother-in-law!" It was the guy who had just shamed Jessica. I blinked, confused, looking at him. "You are Mike," Fiona introduced him. "My cousin, just got back yesterday." I quickly greeted him. "Nice to meet you." Mike looked at me, grinning. "Finally meeting the guy my sister's been talking about for years. Brother-in-law, you're quite handsome." I didn't even get a chance to ask him what that last bit meant before the driver abruptly braked. I instinctively shielded Fiona's head. The driver lowered the window. "What's wrong with you? Want to get yourself killed?" Jessica was blocking the car. She had seen me in the back seat and walked briskly over. "David, get down here. I have something to ask you." I lowered the window, looking at her, my expression blank. Jessica gasped for air. "They said you are the only heir of the group?" "I am." She slammed a fist on the car door. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have made a difference?" I asked her. "If you knew I was the sole heir, would you have stopped testing my love for you? Would you have felt safe then?" I smirked sarcastically. "Probably not. So, Jessica, what are you regretting about?" The window slowly rolled up. I glanced at Jessica one last time. "If you date again, don't play games. If there's no trust, don't drag someone else down." "Let's go," Fiona said, her voice firm. The car gradually drove off. I watched Jessica's slumped figure in the rearview mirror get smaller and then disappear. We dropped Mike off at his place first. As he got out, he exchanged contact information with me. The moment he stepped out of the car, the atmosphere inside suddenly changed. Fiona placed her palm over the back of my hand. "Tired?" "Not really." "If you're tired, take a nap." I didn't feel like talking, so I leaned against the window with my eyes closed. After a while, a warm hand reached over and gently guided my head to rest on her shoulder. I heard a soft sigh. "Fiona." I slowly opened my eyes. "You like me," I said, the words hanging in the air. For a moment it felt like time had stopped. I sensed Fiona's body stiffen, but she quickly relaxed. Her voice was lovely, and her response was definite. "Yes." "Why? I always thought we were just a business marriage, a facade of a couple." "David, we've known each other for almost 17 years. I thought about it. That was true. We had gone to the same fancy elementary school. Our families had lived nearby for a while. That's how we had met. But we had never really talked much. Then we went to different middle schools. Fiona had always been the golden child in my parents' eyes. Though my parents had never put me down, I often heard them praise Fiona, saying she was polite, modest, intelligent, with her own mind. The marriage proposal had been Fiona's parents' idea. I had never known exactly why, but my parents adored her too. And at the time I hadn't had any objections. I had just thought, she's good, marriage would work. As for Fiona liking me, I had never considered that as a possibility. "Fiona, do you remember where we first met?" I asked. "Something from over a decade ago? Who remembers?" I stayed silent. She chuckled. "I remember. 17 years ago, on my way to school, I almost got kidnapped. You saved me." I dredged up that memory from deep within my mind. "Oh, so it was you." Back then, I was just 10. The school wasn't too far from my house, but my folks were worried. They had bodyguards pick me up every day. Rich kids were easy targets for criminals. One day after school, I saw a kid getting pulled into a van from afar. Without thinking, I told our bodyguards to follow. We trailed them for miles, finally catching them in a deserted alley. The bodyguards repeatedly told me to stay in the car, but I didn't listen. I ran out without a second thought. The bodyguards were fighting off the thugs, and using my small build, I squeezed into the van's trunk. Inside, I found a girl tied up, bruised and scared. I untied her and tried to pull her out. She was skinny and not as tall as me. Just as I was getting her out, the driver jumped back, saw us in the back seat, and turned to grab us. I freaked out, yanked the girl hard, and then bit down on his wrist. Right then, her bodyguard showed up with the cops. The guys ran off seeing them. The girl and I sat by the side of the road. She was too terrified to speak, and I just stared at the tooth in my hand. I didn't speak either. When I bit the guy, I got slapped, and my already loose tooth came right out. The girl suddenly started to cry softly. I turned to her awkwardly, trying to comfort her. "Don't cry, it's okay, the bad guys are gone now." I tried mimicking how grown-ups comforted me. "Don't cry, I'll give you a gift." The girl looked at me with tears in her eyes. What gift? I hadn't thought she'd actually want one. Panicking, I pulled out my tooth and handed it to her. Fiona laughed beside me. "I still have that tooth, you know." I covered my forehead, my face red as a tomato. I couldn't help but blurt out, "You're amazing." "Just joking," Fiona chuckled even more. "When I got home, I put it in a little box on my roof. They say doing that helps new teeth grow faster. I found out your name in class. Since then, I've been paying attention to you. You're not like the other rich kids I knew. You make friends with regular folks and could spend an afternoon playing with a stray dog on the street. Our marriage, something I fought for." Fiona paused, her voice softening. "So, when you came to me asking to cancel the engagement for a moment I didn't want to agree." I pressed my lips together. "But you did." "Yes, I did, and I even tried," she said. "Our parents didn't agree, but the truth is, if I had tried hard enough, our engagement wouldn't mean anything anymore." Out of selfishness, she hadn't tried hard enough. She had used the engagement to keep our fragile connection. Her words made my heart skip a beat. I couldn't quite figure out what I was feeling. Just this bittersweet, tangy sensation. Fiona looked at me and smiled. "What's up, feeling bad?" "Oh, so that's it." I nodded. "Kinda feel bad." Fiona stared at me in surprise, not saying anything for a moment. I reached out and took her arm. "I wasn't lying when I said I don't have feelings for Jessica anymore. From now on, I have nothing to do with her. I married you, and making it work with you is the most important thing now." While Fiona was showering, Mike texted me. "Hey, brother-in-law, she's quite a lively one. If my sister ever gives you a hard time, come to me. I'll help you sort her out." I chuckled and replied, "Okay." Seconds later, he texted again. "But it's unlikely. My sister's got a warm heart beneath that cold exterior. She likes you too much to mistreat you." He kept chatting away. "A year ago, when you suddenly called my sister, she was at my graduation ceremony. The moment she heard you wanted to marry her, she ditched me overseas and flew right back." Click. The bathroom door opened, and Fiona stepped out, her hair still damp. She glanced at me. "Why aren't you asleep yet?" I put my phone down, looked at her intently. "Waiting for you." She looked taken aback. I stood up, gently hugged her. "Sorry for making you wait so long." Fiona lifted her eyes to mine, a swirl of emotions in them, and then she kissed me. The room went dark, except for the faint glow of my phone screen. "Brother-in-law, are you there? Brother-in-law, why aren't you answering? I'm telling the truth, I'm not just a cheerleader for my sister. I didn't take her big red envelope. Why isn't my sister replying either? What are you two even doing?"